Hello. Spirituality in visual arts. It's here. It's always been here. Like, spiritual and religious iconography has been in artwork since like the beginning of having that. I'm gonna lay like this because it helps me feel more comfortable. So spirituality in artwork, spirituality and religious iconography has been in artwork since like its beginning, back to cave painting times, legit. Spirituality and religion. I know those two, spirituality and religion, are not the same thing, but for the purposes of this video, we're gonna like lump it into one big category to talk about that type of iconography in artwork. But yeah, so it's been here for a long time. And because of that, you know, knowing an artist's background and having that context behind about what they believe or some ideas of that heavily impacts the interpretation that you may have of the artwork. And if you didn't know of those things, it just would be very hard to get it. Like, you know, have you ever been like sitting down in a conversation with a group of people and, you know, they're talking about something that you just don't know, they're talking about a situation that happened, something that you don't really know about, and you're like picking up these little pieces. Maybe they're saying, oh, this person did this person did that, whatever, blah blah blah. But because you just really don't have the full story, there's no way you can even like get even close to really understanding. And you might like be so skewed in your interpretation of the whole story or whatever is being told because you just don't know what's going on. So context is important. That's the key of what I'm trying to say with that analogy. Let me get my notes. So because I'm a girly who's trying to practice what she preaches, we're gonna practice our skills engaging deeper with two specific artworks: Water-Worshipper by Jean-Michel Basquiat and Fra Angelico's The Mocking of the Christ and the Virgin with Saint Dominique. So we're gonna look at both of those pieces and we're gonna break down some of the different figures in the pieces and what it can mean and how that gives light to different interpretations. I got the idea from this. My college does this thing where you have a 3-week intensive class. Yeah, I was trying to make sure I was holding up 3. Have a 3-week intensive class after the end of the regular spring semester. So I took an art history course, and this is one of the essays topics I chose to write about. And yeah, that 3-week was a lot. I loved the class. I loved art history, and I thought it was really cool. But it is so hard to go to class every day, 3 hours a day, and still have long reading assignments after that. That is not for the weak. But we made it through it, you know. Congratulate me, yes. Congratulate me. Thank you. I appreciate it. I wanted to share what I started looking at in that essay with y'all. So I'm gonna hop over to the voiceover while I work on some artwork and talk to y'all. All right, so if you do not know, Jean-Michel Basquiat was a very popular neo-expressionist artist in the 70s and 80s. He got a start in graffiti under the name Samo, tagging and gaining notoriety amongst the graffiti community in Brooklyn, New York. A lot of his works focus on personal and like sociocultural experiences and the struggles of Black Americans. And he uses a lot of elements from a variety of, and I mean a heavy variety of different cultures, from Haitian Vaudou, graffiti influences, West African religions, and other African diaspora-derived religions, and even pulls from some of Christianity as well. And I feel like that's reflective of his own identity as a Black Puerto Rican Haitian youth growing up in America in a Eurocentric world. I really love that about Basquiat's work, just the different blend, and because I feel like he uses it so well to convey messages and stories in his artwork. A quote from Dr. Anthony B. Penn, he's a professor on humanist thought and Black theology. He said this about Basquiat in reference to him pulling from a Roman sculpture book for his next drawing at the time. He says, he consumes this culture, its dreads and possibilities, signifies it, and produces an alternate perspective and perception of the embodied self. On to the actual work, Water-Worshipper, which was done in 1984. It's a painting using silkscreen technique on a wooden panel. And there's two main figures that we see here. This scene represents the transatlantic slave trade, with the figure on the right being the slaves being transported on ship. This figure is modeled after Mami Wata, also known as La Sirene. I hope I said that correctly, which is a prominent loa in Haitian Vodou and deity in African and Afro-Caribbean ancient legend. She's often depicted holding a snake, which you can see in Basquiat's piece right here. In Vodou, loa are spirits that live among the people and can interact or possess those in the community. And now I want to make it clear that Vodou is not the same as like voodoo portrayed in Hollywood or in Christian-centric exorcism. You know, it's not treated as the same or with the same contempt. No, not at all. Like I was saying. So yeah, Vodou is not the same as voodoo, and it's portrayed and doesn't have the same negative connotation. Instead, a lot of members see it as a way to connect with the otherworldly, and this possession can be a way for the loa to guide or simply interact with the community. A possible interpretation of Basquiat's use of Mami Wata is that he's elevating that of the Afro slave to that of the divine. Or contrastly, it could be that it's the aforementioned possession guiding the slaves as they face, great adversity. The figure on the right side of the piece, or like, I guess your left if you're looking at this video, is that of Nkizi Nkandi, which is a statue of power and contractual agreement for from the Congo peoples, which is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The word Nkandi can be translated to hunter. And given that the statue relates to contractual agreement, an interpretation of Basquiat's use of this is that the Nkizi is as a vindicator or representing the serving of justice of the slaves, suggesting that justice would be served or that cultural ideas would be spread. Regardless, either way, it's a clear representation of spiritual iconography and work that if you wouldn't have had if I wouldn't have had the context behind it, it would be, you would get such a different meaning and it would be hard to understand. Like, especially with the perverted and twisted way that certain things are shown in our world, assuming that voodoo is Vodou and like the way that it's been portrayed without that context and getting that base, it'd be much harder to understand the work. And I'm glad that I had the chance to learn a little bit more about it in my class and research on it a little bit. And everything that I'm picking up from, I'll cite down in my description too. But yeah, the use of this silkscreen technique is Basquiat got introduced to by Andy Warhol, which, known that they were great friends and co-workers. So this is him in a series of different artworks where he's really trying out that wood panel use in the silkscreen as well. There's also an interpretation of the wood panel really bringing that ship feel, since this is all about the transatlantic slave trade. There's also a pole as well, I believe, which I feel like really brings it all together. And I like the elements of the use of 3D and that in this artwork. And yeah, I just love it overall. You can tell I'm a Basquiat glazer. I could talk about this low-key all day. But we're going to continue on to Fra Angelico's The Mocking of the Christ. So Fra Angelico was a notable European Renaissance artist. And he was also a friar in the Dominican Church in the 15th century. He was revered for his skill in naturalism and chiaroscuro, using high contrast in value to make 3D forms. His involvement as a friar in the church and his own belief that his artworks were a form of worship, not even just that of artwork, but his way to give back to God, of course, heavily influences the subject matter that's depicted. Like I said, he believed this was his way of giving back to God and giving back to the Catholic Church and serving his duty. And it was even said of him in a translation of The Lives of Artists by Giorgio Vasari. This translation is also by George Bull. It was said that Fra Angelico would never take up his brushes without a prayer. So that just gives us a bit of context behind and background on who Fra Angelico is, heavily religious, and he believes this is his way to give back, and this is his service. This is his life's purpose in a way, and he believes that of his artwork. It's evident that his works focus on depicting religious Catholic figures and biblical scenes. He was patronized by Cosimo de' Medici, which was the Medicis patronized a lot of things in the Renaissance. He was patronized to create some frescoes in the Dominican Church of San Marco. And that's where this mocking of the Christ with the Virgin and Saint Dominic can be found. As the name suggests, in the artwork we can see here Jesus, his mother Mary, and Saint Dominic. Jesus is elevated in the center, blindfolded, and holding a mock scepter and crowned with thorns, as a way to mock him. And he's also shown being slapped and spat on by floating hands and a head. And this follows what is written in the Gospels about Christ's crucifixion, being mocked and made a spectacle. And in the bottom left, we have the Virgin Mary, who is sitting in a somber expression of grief, mourning over her son's death, understandably, which is also in alignment with the biblical scene. And lastly, in the bottom right, we see Saint Dominic, founder of the Dominican Church, pondering on a text, presumably in a prayer-like or reflective state. A lot of frescoes of this nature weren't only a means to pay respect, but also a way to preach, teach, and evangelize for those who maybe could not read. It was a way of retelling these stories and making sure that they're shown and remembered, and also specifically showing Saint Dominic, who was years later after the biblical story, but showing that you should study this text and you should think on it in a meditative and prayer-like way. A lot of the other San Marco frescoes, naturally, since this is the Dominican Church, represent Saint Dominic as highly reflective. That value lay in the preachers being able to teach not only by word, but also by example, and that the model was their founder, Saint Dominic, whose own prayer life was illustrated, so to speak, on the various walls of their cells. That's from William Hood in a journal on Saint Dominic's manners of praying in all the frescoes, his commentary on that. In my own words, by showing how moral figures interpreted the same biblical stories that were being told in Catholicism of their time, they were showing the idea that it's important to take the time to do this, to reflect on these stories, to imagine and see Jesus and Mary and their emotion and what they went through for their salvation in that religion. They were teaching and giving examples for how one can and should strive to be pious. I also think it's important to note, and I talk about this, but it's so cool how this artwork it seems more surrealist, and it's different for Italian Renaissance art. It's really different in the sense it's much more surrealist than things of its time. I think that's really cool, very ahead of its time in the way that it's showing different elements that aren't necessarily, natural or realistic. I mean, it is painted in a realistic way, but, having a floating hands and a head and these different things that are surreal and these different pieces and putting Saint Dominic in there, even though he's not experiencing, the crucifixion right hand, and showing this in a surreal way, I think is really cool. And I see similarity in, how I love pointing out similarities in things years after, centuries later. I see similarity in Basquiat's work, which is, heavily influenced by graffiti. A lot of graffiti does that, and collage in the same way of taking these different elements and pieces and putting it together to make a whole. That I feel is derivative of surrealism, or at least very similar and connected in a way. And I love that, and I just love it so much. I think it's very cool, which was a lot of the reason why I picked both of these pieces to look at, because I just love seeing that similarity. Last thing I'm gonna add in here, I'm probably gonna say it again, but overall it's near impossible to understand these works without some background knowledge on the spiritual/religious context. Whether it's assumed to be known or not, if we had no knowledge of who certain figures were or what they represent, it'd be near impossible to get close to the message that an artist could have meant. Context in visual arts is so key, especially in a spiritual and cultural sense. So, as we can see, both Fra Angelico and Basquiat use heavy spiritual/religious elements in their work naturally to convey the message they want to convey, whether that's like a form of evangelism or worship or trying to piece together a story. Both, it's evident that it's in both artworks. Fra Angelico's is obviously more strictly Catholicism, as that was the society that he lived in, and Basquiat uses a lot more different blended elements from both Haitian Vodou and other African diaspora religions, and just different elements of obviously graffiti, him having a background as a graffiti artist. And I think what that shows to me, or at least what I interpret from that like blendedness, because in other works Basquiat has used some elements of Christianity and also other African diaspora backgrounds. And to me, it shows like a forced blending that's due to colonization, because when, you know, so many African diaspora religions have had to blend because, you know, them being colonized, them being oppressed by these people and having to follow this way, having to convert, they sort of had to out of necessity, and also in some cases want or desire to, you know, blend that with their own identity and blend that with their own ideas of what community should look like and how you should show up in the world and what your purpose is in the life. And I feel like that, to me, that represents that. Yeah, well, I had a great time taking a more in-depth look at these two artworks with you, and I hope that you come back for more, if there will be more, I don't know. But I really enjoyed it. I love trying to get, you know, the context behind artwork and the artists that made them, and yeah, it was great. The artwork that I was working on in this video is a part of a couple different things. I'm working on a series right now. This was one of the things I think I had in there I was working on. This is work in progress, still working on. A part of a series I'm working on called High School Days, just to represent all my different memories in high school. And if you'd love to see more progress of that, I'd appreciate if you subscribe, follow, and see some more, follow the journey. What else was I working on? I was also working on my final project for my spring drawing class. I think that turned out great. I'm really happy about it. It was my smile. Let me know if it actually looks like my smile. Yeah, you can check out my page for more explanations on those artworks that I'm working on as well. Thank you for watching today, and I hope you have a great day. Go out there and, you know, be a little curious. Try to get the context behind the things that you see. And yeah, have a great one.